Everyone. Welcome. Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Rabbi Eric Abbott here with the Bethesda Jewish Congregation, and it's an honor, it's a privilege to be one of our co-hosts this afternoon, the Intercongregational Partnership Committee amongst Bethesda Jewish Congregation and Bradley Hills Church and MIAC, the mosque. All of us are just honored to be here to represent, to host this panel, which is of course put on by JAMAAT and by JAMAAT, and it's their program. We're just we're housing the show, and but it's great to be here. I'm a rabbi, so what do? I speak from what I know, which is our Torah portion this week, Vayikra, has God called to Moses. We're all called to different things. We're all called to our professions. Maybe we're called to medicine, and that's why we became a doctor. Maybe we're called to peace, and that's probably why we're in this room. I know as a Jew, I'm called to looking at the beginning of Genesis, which says we're all created B'Tselem Elohim, in God's image. For me, that's foundational to my work. That's foundational to this community, to see each other as being created in God's image. And that means we have dignity. We all deserve dignity. We all deserve being seen as human. That means speaking out against homophobia, racism, and of course, Islamophobia and Antisemitism. That's why JADS, that's why JAMAAT are so great. And it's why I'm proud to work here at 6601 Bradley Boulevard, which works against hate through positive interfaith relationships. So wherever we're coming from, may we all continue to fight against this hate through our work together. Amen. And now it's my honor to call up Imad Ad-Din Ahmed from MIAC to say a few more words.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Thank you, Rabbi Gray. He basically said everything I'm going to say, except we're placed for the Jewish congregation, the Muslim congregation, which is Maqam Ibrahim Islamic Center. And the words Maqam Ibrahim means the station of Abraham. So right away we are reminded of our common intellectual and spiritual ancestry, the prophet Abraham, who started this whole monotheistic religious movement going. And it reminds us also that God is the mercy to all of the worlds. And I was asked by one of our congregants to make sure that I pointed that out to you. Rahmatullah lil alameen, the mercy of God to all of the world. So it's my pleasure and honor to welcome you all here. As the rabbi said, where our organizations are just hosting the JIDS and JAMAAT, two organizations I happen to belong to as well, are the ones that are doing the heavy lifting and providing this program. The program is a very important one. We are all concerned with the growth of Islamophobia and of anti-Semitism, and looking forward to our panelists helping us to understand what is happening and perhaps point out what we can start to do about it. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to the founder and head of JIDS, the Jewish Islamic Dialogue Society, who is also, by the way, an expert on Spinoza. And I was using the time I was waiting for things to start to read one of his more recent articles. We'll talk about that later. But it's a great honor. This is a man who is a rabbi, an organizer, and a real mensch.
I have a more honored title than expert in Spinoza. I am an aficionado of Spinoza. that means that's what I do in my free time when I'm on the beach. This is a wonderful venue for an event like this. It hosts a mosque, a synagogue, a church, all together. And you can't get more interfaith than that. So I want to thank all three hosts for making this beautiful space available. And then I'm going to do the disclaimer. There's no way that we can have 4 panelists and have the hosts approve everything they're going to say. So the content that you hear today comes from the panelists, not from the host venue. But I'm sure I can speak for the hosts that they want you to confront anti-Semitism, to confront Islamophobia, and to begin to understand interrelationships. And if you do that, then you can help us all confront them both together. So I'm going to introduce the panelists one at a time, and then they're going to come up and speak. And then we'll do some Q&A, and then we'll have time for small group discussions, because you can't have a dialogue without that, right? The first speaker is Dr. Todd Green. He's the Director of Campus Partnerships at Interfaith America, an organization that inspires leaders and institutions to unlock the potential of America's religious diversity. He previously served as a religion professor at Luther College and as the Executive Director of America Indivisible, an organization devoted to supporting the rights of Muslims in American life. Dr. Green is a nationally recognized expert on Islamophobia. He served as a Franklin Fellow at the State Department, where he analyzed the impact of Islamophobia in Europe. Finally, he is the author of numerous publications and several books, and when you can find the titles interesting, they're worth saying. One of them is The Fear of Islam, an introduction to Islamophobia in the West. And another example is Presumed Guilty, why we should not ask Muslims to condemn terrorism. Dr. Green.
Good afternoon. Thank you for hosting me and having me here today as a conversation partner. I'll do my best to address what is a very sensitive topic, and I hope during our discussion, both as a panel and the entire room, we can talk about a topic that's kind of difficult to talk about in my experience the past 5 months or so, which is anti-Semitism and Islamophobia together at the same time. A year ago, I did not have that difficulty. Today, it is very difficult to the point that I was really apprehensive coming here today because my experience has not been great on college campuses in the past 5 months trying to talk about both of these things and the ways that they may intersect, and we can get to that later on. So I thought I would just give a little bit of an Islamophobia 101 sort of bird's eye view of what is this phenomenon we call Islamophobia, how does it manifest itself, why does it matter that we address this so explicitly right now, but frankly the need for doing so for quite some time. And then hopefully later we'll talk a little bit more about how we can go forward in terms of addressing it. Let me begin by just defining Islamophobia, at least as I as a scholar have defined it in my work. I have defined Islamophobia as hostility towards Muslims that is rooted in racism and that results in exclusion, discrimination, and violence that targets Muslims and those perceived as Muslim. Hostility towards Muslims, rooted in racism, results in the exclusion, discrimination, and violence against Muslims and those perceived as Muslim. That last phrase we'll have to come back to. A lot of particular hate crimes that are driven by Islamophobia, they don't always necessarily end up targeting Muslims. That's the racial piece that we'll get to. There are 3 broad factors, I think, both historically and in the past couple of decades that drive a lot of Islamophobia, and I just want to briefly touch on each of these. The first is imperialism, historically, the second is nationalism, and the third is racism. Imperialism. When Islam comes on the scene in the 7th and 8th centuries, it quickly develops into a series of empires and comes into tension and conflict with European Christian kingdoms and empires. So for many centuries, there was an imperial rivalry between a lot of Europe, and Christian Europe, if you will, and Islamic empires. The thing is, medieval Europe was pretty much the backwater of its day. It was not a very advanced society, and Islamic empires basically had the upper hand culturally, politically, educationally, and militarily. And this was true throughout the Middle Ages into the early modern period, probably culminating in the rise of the Ottoman Empire, which has its heyday in the 16th into the 18th centuries. But what you see by the 19th century is the tide turns in a different direction, and European empires are very much on the ascendancy by that time. They've been around earlier than that. We used to live in such an empire. But Europe, and Britain and France particularly, amongst others, focused their attention on a different part of the world by the 19th century, a lot of Africa and a lot of Asia, and ended up imposing some sort of imperial rule on vast swaths of those populations. A lot of them, not all of them, of course, but there are a lot of them that were Muslim-majority regions. And that is true into the mid-20th century when you start to have this move pulling away from colonization, if you will. But a new imperial rivalry replaces that, which is the Cold War. If you think of the United States and its Cold War battle with the Soviet Union as a form of an imperial battle, the Middle East becomes very much an area of great interest for both the Soviet Union and the United States. They invest a lot of energy and resources into it in order to sustain their superpower status. And then, of course, the Soviet Union falls, and you're sort of left with one empire. That could be debated, but one empire, at least some would argue, would be the United States. And as the United States enters into at the end of the 20th century into the 21st century, there's this desire, of course, to maintain superpower status. But many of the populations for some time that have been obstacles to those status are in Muslim-majority regions. Just as that was the case historically, a lot of the obstacles to European imperial ambitions were Muslim-majority regions. So this imperial tensions, if you will, going for much of history, has framed a lot of the ways that many people in the so-called West have imagined and viewed and understood Muslims, prior to, of course, even to significant numbers of Muslims immigrating to the United States. And so it's hard to understand the tensions there and this piece of Islamophobia without understanding the imperialism and all the foreign policy that goes with that tends to frame Muslims as obstacles to, today at least, to U.S. interests, but also military threats. And when your primary way of looking at a population is through the lens of a gun, for example, right? Then it's hard not to demonize. And so imperialism is one of these factors. It's both historical and it's contemporary. The second one is nationalism. And just to make this brief, particularly talking about nationalism and its ascendancy in the 19th and 20th century, where a lot of modern Western states, as defining themselves as nation states, tend to do so over against outgroups. We know this very clearly from Germany in the 20th century. To define German identity was to do so over against Jewishness. This is one of the intersections of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. But that wasn't unique to Germany. That was true in a lot of Europe, and it has been true historically in the United States as well, identifying what it means to be American over against some racial, religious, or cultural outgroup. Jews have fulfilled that function, if you will, that foil for a lot of Europe and even in the United States in its history. Muslims have done so as well. And you see this very overtly in the past couple of decades, both in Europe and the United States, with Muslims cast as outsiders, as not quite American, as not fully belonging, as in need of having a Muslim ban imposed so that they don't come infiltrate us. And this they and us sort of dichotomy is very prominent in politics. On some ends of the spectrum, maybe more prominent and overt than others, but it really exists across the political spectrum. So this idea that Muslims are not one of us, that they are national security threats, existential threats, this has gone hand in hand with nationalism, and particularly the nationalism that's been on the ascendancy for a couple of decades now globally. But we see this particularly with Muslim minority populations in Europe and the United States. So this defining national identity over against Muslims, which has intersected, of course, with doing so against Jews, is the second pillar of Islamophobia. You can't understand modern Islamophobia without the nationalist piece. The final piece is the most challenging one in a lot of audiences I speak to this about, which is racism. Because the first thing people will say to me is that, all right, Todd Green, I don't know if you know this, but Muslims are not a race. Therefore, this can't be racism. And I just want you to know, I know that. And guess what? Many Muslims know that too. No, Muslims are not a race, but Muslims are racialized. They're treated as a race, imagined as a race, thought of and dealt with as a collective entity, over against which all sorts of stereotypes and tropes can be imposed and projected in a way that has taken place with other sort of religious, racial, cultural outgroups as well, including, by the way, Jews. Anti-Semitism in its modern form in the 19th and 20th century is very much intertwined with racism. A lot of Eastern European Jews immigrating to the United States in the 19th century were not considered fully white. A lot of you in this room probably know that. A lot of Irish Catholic actually were not considered fully white when they immigrated. There's a whole body of scholarship on how Jews became white and how Irish became white. And when I taught in the Midwest, my students were like, what? The Irish? They didn't think the Irish were white? They had not seen the Irish? But that tells you something about the kind of racism we're talking about. Certainly, there's been racism that involves skin color, and I'll talk about that later. But it's also something that social scientists would call cultural racism, in which an entire people, because of perceived cultural attributes or religious attributes, are racialized collectively and treated in that way. And that's what happened with Jews and the Irish in the 19th and early 20th century, and it's what has been happening with Muslims as well. So Muslims are thought of as a collective, and then they're dealt with accordingly. So that when you have a Muslim ban and a presidential candidate propose such a ban, we see this entire broad collective language being used, right? When we are looking at policies in the post 9/11 era, whether it's the database that the government kept, basically called the National Security Entry-Exit Registration System, or NSEERS, that kept track of men, mostly from Muslim-majority countries, coming into the United States. It kept a database, fingerprints, photographs, you name it. A lot of people who are not Muslim don't know that, but that's part of the United States policy, right? Not because of what these individuals had done, but because of who they were. They weren't being fingerprinted because they had done anything wrong. They were being fingerprinted because of where they were coming from. This is the racializing I'm talking about. And all sorts of surveillance and profiling that has taken place with law enforcement agencies and other federal agencies in the post 9/11 era, most notably the FBI and its informant program, or the NYPD and its massive mapping mosque and surveillance program in the first decade of the 21st century. These are all treating Muslims as collectives. And as a contrast, when Dylan Roof walks into a Charleston church and opens fire, he has my same racial background, presumably cultural background, religious background, and not a soul asks me to condemn it. I'm afforded individuality. And if I show up in a church, it's very unlikely that the FBI is going to be there surveilling me. That's the difference. Not the case with Muslims. They're treated as a collective. And that's the racializing I'm talking about. Plus, we're also talking about racism based upon skin color. This is what I mean by those perceived as Muslims. For example, the first post 9/11 retaliatory murder was of a Sikh man. He owned a gas station in Arizona, Sikh, S-I-K-H. And he was killed by a guy named Frank Roque, who thought he was probably killing a Muslim, retaliating for the people who attacked us on 9/11. And a decade later, when we have someone named Wade Michael Page open fire outside of a Gurdwara, a Sikh temple outside of Milwaukee, he almost certainly thought he was attacking Muslims, right? The perception, who gets counted as Muslim, it could be based upon skin color, perceived ethnicity, what they're wearing. It's not like in particular hate crimes, people often stop and ask, what is your religion before they actually commit the act, right? They act upon certain assumptions, and that's also the racism we're talking about. So imperialism, nationalism, racism, those are the three pillars, in my opinion, that drive much of Islamophobia, both historically and in the contemporary setting. What is the impact? What are the casualties? In terms of policies, we're talking about detentions and deportations in the post 9/11 era, targeting Muslims, extraordinary renditions, which is basically shipping people to another country so they can avoid not having to be dealt with in the U.S. judicial system, but in another country where they were most likely going to be tortured, such as sending them to Egypt in the immediate years after 9/11. Also the CIA black sites, and that includes places like Poland and Romania. We have the Muslim ban, right? We have states trying to ban Sharia law. About 14 or so states actually pass such legislation. The majority of states in the United States consider such legislation. So I can go on and on in terms of this, and not to mention just hate crimes, which skyrocketed after 9/11 and never came down to pre-9/11 levels. They were still about twice as high, or 2.5 times as high after 9/11 than they were before 9/11, even when we get past the initial 2001 year. And then they spike again, particularly in presidential election cycles. more so usually than terrorist attacks, which you might think would be the biggest indicators of when we're going to see a spike in hate crimes. But no, it's the presidential election cycle, which, by the way, we're entering into one, where you really have to hold on tight. In 2015 and 16 in particular, where many presidential candidates explicitly targeted Muslims. That's where the Muslim ban was coined, right? Amongst other things, flirting with databases and other kinds of profiling. This rhetoric and the hate crimes, they go hand in hand. It's one of the reasons I think right now, given what's happening geopolitically, the rise of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, is tracking with a lot of rhetoric too. Words actually matter a lot. As Abraham Joshua Heschel once said, pertaining to the Holocaust, words create worlds. And what he meant by that was the Holocaust didn't start with gas chambers, it started with rhetoric. People in positions of power who had the microphone, if you will, to craft that rhetoric, to create imagined worlds over which Jews and others were considered existential threats to the nation, and then people start acting within those worlds. That is happening here in the 21st century. It's happening this year as well. Words are creating worlds, but words can create other kinds of worlds too. We can create worlds of compassion and love and tolerance and mercy with our language as well. That's what I hope we can do more. The last thing I will just say briefly is that in my work recently as Director of Campus Partnerships at Interfaith America, I've visited a lot of college campuses, which has not been fun the past 5 months. Campuses are very tense places. And there are a lot of people right now most impacted by anti-Semitism or Islamophobia who have retreated to their corners. It's very difficult to bring people together. And it's very difficult, as I said at the beginning, to have conversations in which you can raise the possibility that though they have some very distinct histories, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism also have some overlap. They stem from some similar sources, particularly in the modern era. And it's worth having that conversation now more than ever when all the political forces in the world are trying to push these communities apart. We have every reason to understand and believe that in fact these communities share a lot in common when it comes to the kinds of prejudice they face, but also the kinds of resources they have to move forward and build bridges into a better community and a better world. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Rabbi Abby Shulevsky. Rabbi Abby is the Director for Intergroup Relations and Rabbi in Residence for the DC Area Jewish Community Relations Council. She has served as Deputy Director of the Jewish Welfare Board Jewish Chaplains Council, where she worked with Jewish military personnel and veterans. She is the recipient of the 2006 JPRO Network Young Professional Award for her dedication to the Jewish community through her work in the Jewish not-for-profit field. She has become, or has been, a Rabbis Without Borders Fellow. And finally, she serves as on the Executive Council of the Rabbinical Assembly, which is the International Association of Conservative Rabbis. That tells you her denomination. Rabbi Abby.
Hi, everyone. So, Ramadan Mubarak, and please excuse me for taking sips of water while I speak. It's dry mouth issue, and I stay hydrated rather than, not be able to say what I need to say. Todd, I want to thank you first for naming something really, really important. It was very hard to come here today. It was hard for Dan to convince me to participate in this panel, and it was hard to really think, what good is this going to do? How much is this going to create more of an issue for me in my life and my personal, what do I need to worry about personally? And I thought about it, and I said, well, this is what I signed up for. This is what I decided to do. And it is too important to let fear or anxieties or, the rhetoric really take over. And because when the rhetoric takes over, that's when it wins. So when we don't show up, when we don't do this, when we don't start, when we don't let, Dan convince us to be in uncomfortable spaces and have difficult conversations, so thank you, that's when hate wins. So the fact that we are even here today, having this conversation, acknowledging that this is difficult, acknowledging, Fatima and I were sitting here chatting beforehand saying, there is probably going to be something that someone says that bothers someone in this room. If there's one thing I can guarantee about today, I will probably offend someone. And it won't be the first time nor the last. And know that I do it with love, and I do it with compassion, and I do it with acknowledging that each of us here is carrying a certain level of intergenerational trauma. The Jews in the room, the Muslims in the room, the Christians in the room. We are all carrying some kind of intergenerational trauma, and those traumas are what gets messy. And we need to be able to understand and own all of that before we get into, as we start this process. So I was asked to talk about what is anti-Semitism, because that's what I do full-time, sort of. My job with the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington is the Director of Intergroup Relations and Rabbi in Residence. That means that I spend the majority of my time talking beyond the Jewish community with people who are of all kinds of faiths or no faith, all kinds of races, socioeconomic backgrounds, social backgrounds, ethnicities, you name it, and being that bridge. And it's not always easy to be a bridge, that's for sure, but it's important, and it has never been more difficult. I've been in this position now for nearly 5 years. It'll be 5 years this summer. I know, I'm not quite sure how that happened. But it has never been as difficult as it has been these last 5 months. And I thought it was just me until I asked people who have been doing this for 20 plus years, who helped create this field, who said, no, it has never been this bad. So what is anti-Semitism? There are many definitions that are official, that are adopted by one group or another. I am not going to use them. And I'm not going to use them because using a specific definition, in my point of view, and in the point of view of the JCRC, when we do these kinds of talks, and I give this talk, I give information about anti-Semitism to schools, to government agencies, to churches, all kinds of places, different groups all over, human rights officers. The politics behind the definition is not as important as learning the information. So here's the information. Anti-Semitism, the marginalization and or oppression of people who are Jewish or are thought to be Jewish, similar to what we heard with Islamophobia. Anti-Semitism can manifest consciously or unconsciously and is embedded into our society, which means no one is immune. It has existed for over 2,000 years and is often called the longest or the most ancient hatred. Zed. That's it. So you would say if we were laying this out in rabbinic, text, I would say this is the Mishnah. This is like the key sort of text that the key legal text we're gonna learn from, and then everything else we're gonna explore is Gemara. It's all of the conversation around it. So the Gemara is where it gets really complicated. And luckily I'm a rabbi and I love getting into complicated, so that's where we're gonna dive into. So what does all of that mean? What does anti-Semitism look like? I don't have the kind of history background and scholarly work that Todd does, that's fine. I'll fill it in with humor. And but there are tropes, and Todd started to mention tropes that come up for Muslims or those perceived to be Muslim when we're dealing with Islamophobia, and I'd like to name the ones that come up in anti-Semitism. So the first one that we see is power, that Jews have incredible power. We've heard about this in things like space lasers, that, Jewish space lasers. I don't have one, and I don't know any Jews who do, nor do we control the weather. Disloyalty, that Jews are only loyal to their own people, or they're loyal to Israel, and they're not loyal to the country in which they are living, the country in which they find themselves. Also similar to this idea of nationalism that we saw come up with Islamophobia. Greed, that Jews are greedy and love money. We've heard this one. This one comes up a lot in today. Deicide, that the Jews killed Jesus. At one point in this world's history, this time of year would have been a very, very dangerous time of year for a Jew. You're very likely to get killed in parts of Europe because it was around Easter time. And the texts and the readings around Easter were usually blaming the Jews for killing Jesus. We didn't do that. So just to sort of see how far we've come, I'm speaking at a church on Palm Sunday that would not have happened generations ago. The blood libel. That not only did the Jews kill Jesus, we then continued to kill Christians, especially Christian children, and use blood for Jewish rituals. Use the blood of Christian children for Jewish rituals. That is not the case. We have never done that. It is a fallacy. We see it today in some of the worst rhetoric that has come out surrounding the war in Gaza, that Israel and the Israeli government is murdering Palestinian babies for the purpose of harvesting their organs or using their blood. This is not happening. The murder, the killing, the huge loss of life, that is not it, which I'll put that in another place for a moment, but that has no truth. Denial. Denial used to mean that the Holocaust, people saying the Holocaust didn't happen. There are still people who say that and deny that it was, it wasn't real, or it wasn't to the extent that Jews say that it was. However, we're also seeing the pendulum swing another way into this sort of hyper acceptance. On January 6th, we saw people walking through the Capitol building wearing t-shirts that said Camp Auschwitz and 6 million wasn't enough. That not only are people looking, is this current wave of hate, looking toward accepting that the Holocaust was there, but that it should be continued. And this is one of those scary pieces that we have seen show up in all sides of the political spectrum. We have seen it, people that are saying, Hitler didn't do enough in killing Jews, and then we wouldn't have problems in the Middle East. And we're seeing Hitler didn't do enough because Jews are trying to replace good white people in this country. And the last one is probably the most complicated and the one that has caused so much hurt and tension, and Todd spoke about the campuses. The last one is anti-Zionism and how we understand that. So what I will say about anti-Zionism is, and the connection of anti-Semitism and Israel. It is not anti-Semitic to criticize the government of Israel or its military forces. Full stop. Not anti-Semitic. I've done it. I have many opinions on, as I'm sure all of us here do, have many opinions on what has happened since October 7th and onward. It is not anti-Semitic to have those opinions. Here's the extremely fine line where it crosses into anti-Semitism. When you say that Israel does not have a right to exist, when there is the statement that Jews do not have a right to self-determination in that land, and when the criticism that's coming about the different practices about the government gets into global control, power, money, sneakiness, the blood libels, things like that. It's a very, very fine line. So I also offer this understanding of what is anti-Zionism and how that connects to anti-Semitism, with thinking about, I as a Jewish person, I love Israel. I struggle with Israel, and I also fully understand and accept and pray for a day when I can be in that land and I can have self-determination in that land, and Palestinians can have self-determination in that land. And that does not in any way make me anti-Semitic. It makes me a person, it makes me a person that's capable of holding two truths at one time. And if more of us could hold two truths, oh my goodness, this world would be amazing. But we can't. So, what's going on right now? I'd like to just share a few quick stats that a friend of mine who works over at AJC, the American Jewish Committee, they're getting ready to release their 2023 report on anti-Semitism. Their survey started October 5th and then went through the end of November. So they have some fascinating information. And I'm sure it will be even more interesting next year, in the next year as well. One of the pieces that I want to pull out and I was glancing through things quickly, so I don't know the number of people surveyed off the top of my head. 25% of American Jews surveyed said that they experienced or were the target of some kind of anti-Semitism in 2023. And that number had gone up from the previous year. I think it was just under 20%. But the one that stuck with me, because it made me think about my own life, and here as a resident of Montgomery County, 2 kids in MCPS, go to synagogue, not too far away in Chevy Chase, was that 46% of American Jews avoided at least one behavior that clearly identified them as Jews in the last 12 months. So that could be like the time when I was on the metro and I made sure that even though it was really warm, because I get warm very easily, I kept my winter hat on because I didn't want anyone to see my kippah. It meant, do my kids wear their Break for Shabbos shirts that they got at camp, that they love? My son wasn't sure about wearing it to school the first week, he goes in middle school, because he just didn't know, in his words, I just don't know the vibe yet. He's in 7th grade. Or my 3rd grader saying, they just don't get me, and no one really gets what it means for me to be Jewish right now. That's in 3rd grade. And that's just my family. And we're pretty well connected with the Jewish community. They feel pretty comfortable with it. Mommy's a rabbi, all of that. But there are people who are genuinely scared. And then my fear is that their fear prevents them from seeing the fear of others around them. So it prevents them from seeing what is happening to Muslims in this community, prevents them from seeing what is happening to BIPOC people in this community, to LGBTQ plus people in this community. And like Todd mentioned, that sort of everyone's turning to their own corners. It's scary, and that can't happen. It really, truly can't. The one thing that I need for everyone to take here today is to realize that the traumas that we're all talking about are real, and that we can throw statistics out at things, we can we can look at all the numbers, but it's, and numbers are hard to sometimes digest. What is a 630-some% increase in anti-Semitic acts in Montgomery County? What does that mean? That's the number that ADL has. But what does that actually look like? Does that look like swastikas all over a school? Does that look like a sign painted on a high school? Or does that also look like people in a workplace saying, you Jews really have so much power, you should just get over it already? Or, you don't have to take off for this Jewish holiday because it's really not all that important. Things like that. It's a big spectrum, as we all know, and we're all carrying these things with us. So how are we understanding each other? How are we taking the time to understand each other? And how are we taking the time to make sure that our own traumas, our own pains, are not consuming us so much that we can't continue to be there for each other?
So if you're a baseball fan, you know exactly how much pressure is being put on our next speaker, because she's going third. Babe Ruth went third, right? Lou Gehrig with the cleanup hitter, but Babe Ruth went third. So it's a lot of pressure. Fatima Argun is a strategy consultant, a visionary, a community activist, and an advocate, focusing on interfaith engagement, dialogue, and women's empowerment. Her career includes work at senior levels in international marketing, strategic planning, and business development. She has served in a leadership capacity as a member of the Arlington County Democratic Steering Committee, chair of its Interfaith Outreach and Advocacy Caucus, and as a delegate to the DNC. Fatima serves on numerous boards, including both JID's board and JAMAAT's board. And finally, she is the co-founder of the Arlington chapter of the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom. Fatima.
Wow, I don't know how to, both, I don't know how to follow Todd and the rabbi's presentations. I really feel at a loss because they were just so powerful and so content rich. I just want to say that I really appreciate the rabbi's understanding and saying what she did about intergenerational trauma, because it really does affect a lot of us. You hear more about intergenerational trauma from the Jewish community, but not so much from the Muslim community, and I think it's because it's a newer community and it's taken a while for people, and it's possibly more diverse, and there are a lot of different factors associated with that. So I really appreciate your recognizing that, because that's a really important component in terms of going forward, sort of having a sense of compassion for each other. So I'll just start by saying good afternoon, everyone. First, I really want to thank the Bethesda Jewish Congregation for graciously hosting this very important program to tackle the challenges that affect both the Muslim and Jewish communities, especially in the week of October 7th. I'll also say that I'm honored to step in for my friend and colleague Maggie Johnson, who actually was going to be speaking here, and I'm speaking at her place today. She had a family emergency that precluded her being here, and so I'd just like to, in honor of what is happening in Maggie's life right now, I'd just like, her father is not well, and I'd like for us to just take a few seconds of time to send them positive healing energy. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward. So today, I'm going to be sharing with you a bit of history around JAMAAT's recent advocacy regarding addressing Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate and bigotry in Montgomery County. I've also been asked to share about this work from a personal perspective. So just to let you know, what I will be imparting is my own opinions as well as those of JAMAAT. It is what it is. So, bit of background. I'll also say that I'm sorry to be reading from a script, but I didn't have a whole lot of notice, so my experience in speaking in extemporaneously is, I need more of it maybe. Here we are. So, my relationship with Jewish-Muslim dialogue was turbocharged in 2017 following Trump's election. Chaos associated with the Muslim ban that was swiftly instituted and poorly executed in the early days of the Trump administration, in addition to rumors of a Muslim registry, sent shockwaves through both our communities. For the Muslim community, because of the threat of adding yet another, as Todd very comprehensively covered, adding yet another layer to an already Islamophobic environment that had been created since 9/11. And for the Jewish community, because of its parallels to many previous chapters experienced in Jewish history of persecution and segregation based on religion, including, of course, events leading up to the Holocaust. For me personally, it was a full-on assault on social justice, equity, and democracy. And that spurred me into action. I knew that this was not the America I had grown up in, and not the future I wanted for myself or my loved ones. As a trained facilitator, I already knew how to run focus groups and workshops to discuss critical issues, so I started to become more involved in dialogues on political activism through leadership roles in the Democratic Party and other groups such as Braver Angels that urgently sought to better understand and try to heal the growing divisions among us as Americans, evidenced by Trump's election and sort of laid bare a lot of the divisions that previously may not have been as apparent. So, fast forward one day, a few months later, into 2017, I get a call from the leadership of the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, asking if I would be interested in co-founding and co-leading the Arlington chapter of the organization. I accepted without hesitation, and in July of 2017, met with my two Jewish sister co-leads for the first time. Being the nerdy Washingtonians we all are, we organized meetings with our laptops and spreadsheets. Yes, we really did this. And we took it seriously. We really wanted to design a chapter that was optimal, that demographically and on all levels, and it was representative of not only the people in this region, but ideally on a larger scale. So we vetted a long list of sisters that wanted to join, considering all aspects of the demographic balance, and we actually did it. I think we did. We formally became the second chapter of the Sisterhood in the DMV area in October 2017. That is our anniversary. That's when we first met. As we learned about each other and our religious practices, we forged friendships, did community projects, and became a vital support for each other. The dominant message of the Sisterhood at that time was that Jews and Muslims must support each other and stand against hate and bigotry directed towards us as, quote, the same people that hate Jews also hate Muslims. And there are plenty of examples of this. The Muslim ban, Charlottesville, and the Tree of Life were just a few examples. Over the years, along with my Muslim and Jewish sisters, we organized and attended Holocaust remembrance events, interfaith rallies, letter writing, phone banking, iftars, seders, the list is long. In subsequent years, our sisterhood traveled to various destinations on the Building Bridges trips designed to familiarize us with each of our faith traditions through visits to religious and cultural sites to help us understand better the history and presence of our faith traditions in those locations, all the while building relationships based on a deeper understanding. In 2018, I traveled on a civil rights journey through the American South. In 2019, we traveled on a Holocaust study trip to Berlin, Warsaw, and Auschwitz. Now, this is very significant for me because, and I think for the sisterhood in general, I think we broke some important ground here. We stood in the gas chamber together and movingly in a prayer circle in a far section of Auschwitz called Canada, hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, where stolen Jewish possessions were sorted for Nazi purposes. There on the grounds of Auschwitz, we performed what is believed to be the first joint Muslim-Jewish prayer, honored all the lost lives, and read the names of relatives who perished. I had the honor of reading names given to me by sisters who did not make the trip. By then, I had been recruited as a board member of JIDS, and I'm also now, as Dan just mentioned, also a member of JAMAAT, which was formed as an activist spin-off of JIDS that came out of the annual Imam Rabbi Summit. So in JAMAAT, we work to create awareness over key issues facing our communities, while also advocating for our shared values and serving community. An example is our recent dental clinic for Afghan refugees. Our dedicated Rapid Response Committee has written several op-eds and letters to address pertinent issues, such as the Dobbs decision and how the basis on which it was decided didn't consider either Muslim or Jewish faith traditions. So I'd like now to fast forward to the topic at hand, how the climate of hate directed towards Muslims and Jews has changed since the horrible Hamas attack of October 7th and Israel's escalation to a full-scale war and mass killing and starvation of a civilian population, among other war crimes well documented and I'm sure familiar to this audience. Many see what is happening in Gaza as a genocide in the making. The purpose here is not to discuss this conflict, but to share how it has impacted our community here, our interfaith relations, and how JAMAAT has worked to address the anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim, those who get mistaken for being Muslim, hate and bigotry occurring here in Montgomery County, where hate has no home. On October 17th, JAMAAT organized an interfaith rally in front of the White House, where we all shared our mutual sorrow over the violence and loss of life. We expressed the need for embracing our shared humanity and the hope that the hostages would be returned and there would be an end to the bloodshed. Even though there were calls for ceasefire in the group, we respected the perspectives of those who didn't want one or were unsure. Then, on November 5th, at a peaceful interfaith rally organized by a Palestinian group calling for a ceasefire in Gaza and freeing the hostages, right here in Montgomery County, and in fact, right here in Rockville, an Islamophobic incident occurred. A group of what appeared to be and sounded like Israelis based on their accents and wrapped in Israeli flags for the next 2 hours tried to disrupt and drown out the peaceful rally with vile chants and threats, using bullhorns, and I understand the life of one of the speakers was also threatened, and he was physically pushed by the Israeli group. The JAMAAT board was shocked, appalled, and in disbelief. And we knew we had to do something about it. And now, if you'll bear with me, I'll play just a short clip from the event for you so you can see what I'm talking about. Taking me a while to get this together. There we go. Okay. So,
Anthony, can you turn the screen toward us?
I will, once I get it set up.
Sure.
Yep. So, I've got, unfortunately, the cursor to control the screen is on my computer. So, sorry. We were gonna have a projector, but our projector broke, so this is the next best thing that we have to let everyone know. Here's what I'm going to do. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start this real quickly. Actually, I think, let's see if I can turn around here and do it from this. Yep, I think I can do it. Oh no, I have to use the cursor. Still, okay. I'm gonna see if I can, well, we'll just, full screen here. I think, can you all see that? I mean, I'm gonna pull it over here so everyone can see it. You might wanna just sort of huddle, you know, just, and if you could, everyone, I'll turn, thank you, I'll turn it a little bit more this way so everyone can see it. But I don't know how much of the audio you'll be able to hear. I think I have it up full blast so everyone can hear it. But we're just gonna have to do our best. So this is kind of our best effort. Oh, hold on, let me just, I think I figured it out actually, sorry. Apologies for the AV challenges here.
You can skip that and just talk about it.
I would rather not, and I thank you, Mel. Okay, and here we go.
Can you repeat what they said? I couldn't
Microphone. I can replay it if, you know. Okay, I don't want to re-traumatize the audience. The purpose, and I probably should have prefaced, you know, the showing of the video with a comment.
Fatima, take the microphone, please.
I'm sorry. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I probably, I apologize for traumatizing anyone, but I thought that this was really important content to impart, just so we got a sense of what is really happening out there. I realize it probably made a lot of people uncomfortable. I don't want to re-traumatize people, but I probably should have prefaced my comments by letting everyone know that this is going to cause probably some discomfort. But, you know, if we stay in our comfort zones, we don't grow. So I think we need to be aware of things that are happening out there so we can address them. That's pretty much it for that video. So I'll just continue. If I may, I'll just go ahead and put this over here. Again, apologies for the small screen. Our projector broke down, so we weren't able to use that as we had hoped. But anyway, where did JAMAAT? The important thing is not really what happened, although that is pretty significant, and I hope everyone here can agree that this is something that we all need to be concerned about. But I'll go ahead and give you a quick timeline to let you know what JAMAAT's actions were in relation to this incident. Accident too, maybe. Anyway, on November 27th, JAMAAT sent an official letter to Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich and members of the County Council calling on him and the County Council to denounce the attack on the demonstrators on November 5th, pointing out that Council member Andrew Friedson was the only member of the Council to have said anything. We did not receive a response from either Elrich or Council members. That was kind of concerning. Then, on December 13th, JAMAAT took part in a Zoom meeting of Montgomery County Committee Against Hate Violence, a semi-official body, and laid out what had happened on November 5th in Elrich and the Council's non-response so far to our calls on them to speak out. Committee Chair Lisa Taylor and other committee members expressed shock as to what had happened, said that the committee would issue a statement denouncing it, which they later did, and said Elrich and the Council should also respond in kind. Unfortunately, neither of those things subsequently happened. On December 19th, the Rockville Town government, and I have to commend the JAMAAT board for being as persistent as they were, because had we not had the commitment of everyone on the board to continue to pursue this as something that needed to be addressed, it wouldn't have happened. So I just want to commend everyone here. Going forward, December 13th, December 19th, the Rockville Town government met and agreed that in light of November 5th and other acts of Islamophobia they had heard about, they had decided to amend a resolution they were planning to pass at that meeting denouncing anti-Jewish hate to also denounce anti-Muslim hate, anti-Arab hate, and anti-Palestinian hate. So there seemed to be some cause for optimism that pressure was building on Elrich and the Council to speak out. Then, I'm sorry, there's more. January 10th, Elrich takes part in a seminar on Islamophobia in Montgomery County and beyond, sponsored by the Community United Against Hate, a Montgomery County-based non-official body which had done a similar event on anti-Semitism several months earlier. Unfortunately, Elrich seemed bored and detached from the issue, noting that he had suffered as a Jew in public schools 60 years ago, but didn't express anger and indignation. This was now happening to Muslim students in Montgomery County schools as well. In conversation with Amberine Khan, a Montgomery County-based attorney chairing the event for CUAH, Elrich said he would not denounce the November 5th incident because he had not been made aware of it at the time, and didn't relish condemning something in retrospect. Especially if he did that for Muslims, he'd have to do that for Jews and others as well. He came across as out of touch and non-caring, and we've heard nothing from him or the county council since, making it clear that he prefers to cover up the toxic November 5th event and move on. So the end result of all of this so far is that little politician response, the principal caving to parents' pressure, teachers. There have been numerous acts of hate targeting the American Muslim population, including the murder of an imam in New Jersey, the stabbing of a Palestinian American boy, and others too numerous to mention. So all of this to sort of, throw out there a lot of things that I think, since these days we exist in our social media bubbles, and we don't see things outside of them. These are things to point out that are important for us all to know. Why not to, get a jab in at the other person or the other group? That's not the point. That's a complete waste of time. The issue is to raise awareness so that we can come together as communities who are both threatened by these outside forces and figure out a way forward, figure out a way to work together. That's the whole impetus behind what I'm talking about, what JAMAAT does, and, you know, my showing the video, which may have made some people uncomfortable. I understand that. So, I could go on with a lot of other stats. You know, the Council on American Islamic Relations from October to December 2023 cited, I'm just wrapping up. I get it, okay. So I was gonna say, I've got a lot to say here, but we're running out of time. But they cited 3,578 complaints, a 178% increase, to include unemployment, to include employment discrimination, hate crimes and incidents, education discrimination, and there's a long list against Muslims. So, all this to say that, you know, the same dynamic that lets our county exec turn a blind eye to anti-Muslim incidents is the same dynamic at work in the national level, with far-reaching consequences of excusing and funding war crimes. But that's another conversation. In conclusion, I'd like to say that interfaith should not be about protecting our tribes, but about uplifting each other through shared values for the common good. When we don't know how to respond to a crisis, we must go to our values that all religions hold sacred: love for the other, caring for the stranger, justice and mercy, to treat others as you would want to be treated. I'm really wrapping up, I promise. In the Quran, 49:13, it says, "O mankind, we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes so that you may know one another." And the idea here is to encourage original thought and indeed healthy competition so that the best possible solutions can be found for the issues addressing mankind. And that's what I was getting at in terms of our respective communities working together to find solutions that work for both of us. So I just want to thank you all for listening to me and listening to what I have to say, and thank you all for the opportunities to speak from my heart.
Well, the only thing I have to say about JIDS is that we're a dialogue society, so we spend as little time as possible with people here and as much time as possible with you guys. And that means there's only one more person between you and your voices and information. So let's get right to it. Mindy Weinstein is the director of the Washington Field Office of the EEOC, which I hope you all know is a federal agency devoted to combating employment discrimination. She oversees operations of the EEOC's Washington Field Office, including investigations, mediations, federal sector hearings, and community outreach and education in the DMV, Washington, D.C., and Northern Virginia in particular. Before taking on her current duties, Mindy has served in a number of other capacities for the EEOC, including as a special assistant to its vice chair, as an attorney for the EEOC's Systemic Litigation Program, and as an EEOC's trial attorney. And she's also served as a special assistant U.S. attorney, which means she's probably one of 50 government attorneys in the room, and at least two of us here.
Something has to bring everybody together, right? Thank you for including me. I'm going to try to speak quickly about three main areas today. And they are the laws that the EEOC enforces and how that applies to the issues that we're talking about today, what to do if you think that you've been discriminated against, and three, just a few words about the EEOC's particular focus on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. So first of all, the laws. The laws that EEOC enforces prohibit discrimination on a number of bases, including discrimination based on religion, national origin, and race, which are sort of the focus of what we're talking about today, but also other areas like sex and age and disability. the laws prohibit discrimination in a wide range of areas, so you can't treat somebody differently based on race, religion, national origin, etc., in everything from how you recruit for jobs, hire for jobs, pay different people in jobs, can't segregate people by religion, national origin, race, etc., all the way through disciplining people, discharging people. So actions that were based on somebody's religion or race, national origin, etc., if it's because of that, then that would be illegal, the whole gamut of employment decisions like I just described. Our laws also prohibit harassment at work. So that has come up, obviously, in this context. That can include comments, graffiti, I don't have both hands, but jokes that are racist, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic. It could be graffiti, slurs, mocking people's accents, mocking people based on their cultural attire. Obviously there's a range of ways that people treat each other horribly, and a lot of that could be part of a harassment claim at work. Employers are liable for that harassment under certain circumstances, certainly if it's like an owner of a company who's doing it, or similarly high-level person who's engaging in that behavior, or if the person is subjected to some kind of action at work, like you're fired as a result, or it was a part of the harassment, then all of that, the employer would be liable. If it's other situations like where the supervisor is the harasser and there's no employment action, or a coworker is the harasser, or even a customer, then there's a different set of circumstances that we might look at, which may include whether the company had a policy, whether against harassment, whether they had a procedure, whether somebody reported it, that sort of thing. So these are the kinds of factors we look at in a harassment case. Is it just a couple comments, or is it severe, pervasive, the nature of the conduct that I just described? Okay. Our laws also, with respect to religion, require reasonable accommodation. So if a person has a sincerely held religious belief, observance, or practice, then an employer would need to accommodate that unless it would cause an undue hardship. So the places that we might see that, and I think a little bit of this was referenced earlier, are people who need a holiday off because of their religious observance, people who need a schedule adjustment because of a religious observance, changing or modifications to break times, allowing, let's say an employer has a rule that says no head coverings. You may need an accommodation for a person who wears a yarmulke, a hijab, a turban, that is based on a sincerely held religious belief. So this is another kind of case that we see at the EEOC, and an employer, again, would have to provide accommodations for those sorts of things if it's a sincerely held religious belief, and it wouldn't cause an undue hardship to the employer. I just want to mention all of our laws also prohibit retaliation. So an employer can't take an action against somebody because they say, I would like an accommodation, or they report incidents of harassment, or what could be escalating to rise to the level of harassment. If they file a complaint at the company or at their agency or organization, they come to the EEOC. All of that is protected activity, and an employer couldn't retaliate against someone for that. Okay, so that's the, quick 101 on what the laws are and how that might intersect with the kind of issues that we're talking about today and how they may play out at the workplace. So what happens if a person feels like they're being discriminated against at work for one of these reasons, in one of these ways? Well, I talked a little bit about harassment cases, and they're a little bit different, and sometimes there is a burden on the employee to report up, especially if the employer has good policies. And sometimes even before a case of harassment escalates, a person, if it's safe to do so, may be able to say, hey, let's not talk about religion at work, let's just leave that outside of the workplace. So sometimes it's a matter of a person just sort of speaking up, like, hey, that's making me uncomfortable, can we just talk about the sales figures this month, or whatever it is that applies to work, if that's safe. But often employers have a harassment policy or a procedure, so it's often worth looking at what that says to do and following along with that, especially if it's a coworker or a supervisor who's subjecting the person to harassment. And by the way, I think there's been a little bit of a theme of this. We can be allies to each other. People who see harassment of someone else can be the person who speaks up, who says something to the supervisor, who goes with the person to HR or to the manager and tries to report it up. Because reporting and trying to get an employer to do the right thing and follow their own policies and, you know, take an action that's appropriate to make it stop, it is an important first step. People can also come to the EEOC to file a charge. There are time deadlines for doing that. It's generally speaking 300 days in this area, but sometimes it's not. So we have information on our website about filing charges. The process usually begins online, and you can go to eeoc.gov and get some information and answer a few questions, and then schedule an intake appointment, which starts the process. Many of our offices also have walk-in hours, so if you've been subjected to discrimination at work and you want to come and file a charge, then you could walk in, and if our schedule allows, we will try to fit you in during the day. There's a completely different process, by the way, that applies to federal employees, where they need to go first to their own federal agency. So if that's where you are, you don't file first with the EEOC, you first go to your own EEO department, and for that there's a 45-day deadline. Okay, and then the last thing I just want to mention real quick is the EEOC's focus on addressing Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. This has been a key priority for EEOC in September of 2023. EEOC issued a new document that sort of sets forth what our priorities are and certainly applies very specifically to our enforcement work, the kinds of cases we may prioritize, our outreach work in the community. And in that document from September, it specifically said that our priorities include discrimination, bias, and hate against religious minorities, specifically including Islamophobia and antisemitism. We said in that document, addressing discrimination influenced by or arising as a backlash in response to local, national, and global events was a priority. So you see, this is a priority, is what I'm trying to relay. We are here, we have a lot of information on our website. I'm gonna try to put out there somewhere this handout that describes, it's called Anti-Arab, Anti-Middle Eastern, Anti-Muslim, and Anti-Semitic Discrimination Are Illegal. And it provides a summary of some of the stuff I've talked about today and a way to get some more information to follow up. So we're doing a ton of work in this area, and I thank you for including me today, and I'm happy to hang out for a little while and answer questions.
I want to thank each of you. That was really super informative, I think, for everybody. And now it's your turn. So with the time left, I want to sort of divide the time between Q&A and small groups. Maybe the best thing to do is like to form lines in the corridors where people will have either questions or comments. Comments are okay if they're short, okay? And I would ask the speakers, we've heard a lot from you guys. We want to hear a lot from them. So if you like the cut of your own jib, that's what showers are for. All right, go ahead.
30-second question or comment. David, thank you, everybody. One thing that I...
Oh, excuse me, just a very quick setup here. I wear two hats. I'm sorry, Rabbi.
Okay. Hello.
You can go around that way.
Where's the
formal line?
Sure. Thank you, Rabbi. One thing I struggle with, but I think it's natural and yet unhealthy, is a natural tendency to find right and wrong and to make comparisons. And this is, I think, been exacerbated the last 5 months. Just two examples. Talking about genocide. And some of these words were even used today. Genocide, ethnic cleansing, maybe attributed to what the Israeli government is doing. The natural retort or tendency is to say, well, what about the Holocaust? And make comparisons. And you go down the wrong road. Or calling Hamas a terrorist organization. the natural tendency is to respond to that and say, well, you know, is it any better with the current government in Israel or its leaders? And then there's a natural tendency to compare right or wrong. And I say that I'm struggling with this because I don't think that's a healthy way to go. But it's seemingly a natural way, and I think a lot of us probably do that in our families or with friends. So any comments that anyone would like to make about that?
Maybe we should, anyone to comment, or do you want to go to the next person, please? Go ahead, Kay, go ahead. You have a burning desire to comment. Sure.
Thank you.
Hi. First, thank you all very much for your talks. I found them all really enlightening, really, is this on? Yes. And really helpful. And thank you, Fatima, for sort of jumping in on short notice. I wanted to just add a little bit of context to what Fatima talked about as someone, as a Jewish participant in JIDS and JAMAAT, who was present in the Zoom meeting at that meeting where Montgomery County Executive Elridge was present. At that meeting, there were a number of young Muslims, I think they were almost all young women, high school students, Montgomery College students, who recounted their experiences of their very traumatic experiences of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry. And they were so traumatized that they didn't want to give their names, and they didn't want to turn, their cameras on for Zoom. And we listened to their stories for, 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. And after that, Elridge still refused to, make a statement about Islamophobia or condemn that what happened on November 5th.
Thank you. Go ahead.
In watching that video, I didn't hear everything that went on. I will accept that it was probably, very, inappropriate and harassing statements, and I don't think anybody should be silenced. Having said that, I feel like Fatima's presentation and, I'm sorry, your name? Yeah, really was somewhat one-sided and almost like designed to leave us with the impression that Islamophobia, is at the same level. It's not even a matter of comparing, but it's uncomfortable to me because I would have hoped, not as a matter of comparison, but there would have been an acknowledgement that probably tens of thousands of Jewish students on campuses throughout the country they're not all hiding in their dorms, but they're afraid. If anybody watched the hearings, the U.S. House of Representatives, it's pretty clear to me. I don't know if it's clear to the people on this panel that the university presidents of many institutions are doing virtually nothing. I would have liked, to hear something to the effect of, that protesters, they're protesting at the U.S. Holocaust Museum, okay? And if you want to talk about Montgomery County, 4 Montgomery County teachers were disciplined. They were suspended temporarily because of anti-Semitic messages. And in response to that, now they're suing for defamation. So it's not really just a matter of comparing, but I think it's a matter of being fair and to present the other side, which I don't feel was really adequately done. And the last thing I'll say is that one can debate whether or not there were war crimes, and I don't necessarily support everything that the Israeli government does either. But it just seemed very selective to accuse Israel of war crimes. I heard nothing about Hamas and what they're doing.
So, Rabbi Abby, hold on. Rabbi Abby, Rabbi, wait a minute.
I just wanted to thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Rabbi Abby is going to go next, but on behalf of the organizers, what you saw today was a presentation on Islamophobia. That's what we asked Dr. Green to talk about. A presentation on anti-Semitism. That's what we asked Rabbi Abby to talk about. And a presentation from a Muslim member to talk about experiences, which included her talking about going up to Auschwitz. So one of the things that I've found in JIDS over the years, there's never complete balance, but we try over the course of time to get different perspectives out. So Rabbi Abby, please.
So that's why I want to thank you for your perspective.
So, one of the things I've learned over the past however many months and 150 plus days of the hostages being held captive is that no matter what I do, someone's going to tell me I'm wrong and how I'm living it and how I'm standing up for the Jews. So that is the first thing. It is entirely possible, as I said when I spoke, to recognize the rampant anti-Semitism that is happening in this world. I mean, I'm terrified. I for the first time, I'm a woman, I'm a conservative rabbi, I struggle with the Israeli government and have no idea what I would do if I were to live there, because I don't know how they would give me a job. Started looking at what would Aliyah papers look like for me to leave this country and move to Israel, because I'm scared. That is real. And I know that because right now I move through the world at times, white presenting, because Jews like me, Ashkenazi Jews, have conditional whiteness in this world, in this country. We're, white and not going to get, racially profiled until white supremacists or whatever decide that we're not white enough and Jews don't count anymore. I know that that's only going to go so far. And I know that I need to use that right now to also say that that allows me to be able to report the anti-Semitism that's happening. And that allows me and that allows my colleagues who are every day, JCRC colleagues, ADL colleagues, who are every day dealing with the school system, because it's bad in schools. It's bad for Jewish kids, full stop. It's also bad for Muslim kids, and they cannot report it. So numbers are going to look different because the Muslim kids do not feel comfortable reporting. They know that it's just not happening, which is why, in the spirit of dialogue, I wish, and I will say this, not putting down any political alliances or anything, I wish that JAMAAT was taking as much of an effort and as much of a focus with what is happening to our children in the public schools as they are to what happened in one event, which was horrific. And I know that group, and I want nothing to do with that group. I wish that you guys were putting as much effort into what is happening to our kids in the schools every day, because Muslim kids are having their hijabs pulled off. And that's not okay. And it is not okay for Jewish kids to feel threatened. It's not okay for Muslim kids to feel threatened. That's where we got to put our energy if we want to fix anything in this county.
If I could also comment really quickly, thank you, Rabbi, for standing up for everyone, which is what we're disagreeing with. It's okay. I mean, healthy disagreement is important because it opens up the path for having healthy conversations where we can sort things out and, decide where we agree, where we don't agree, where we intersect and where we don't. Just to really quickly address your point, and again, once again, thank you for bringing that up. It's a very important point. Yes, as Dan said, I was here to provide the Muslim perspective on things. Having said that, I will also say that I worked very hard on addressing not just Islamophobia, but anti-Semitism as well on a number of different levels. In various organizations that I'm a part of. I won't bore you with the list here, but it is a key part of what I do, and I think it's important to not just, again, stay in our tribal corners. It's to try to reach out to the other side and see how we collectively can work to make things better for each other and for our society as a whole.
Can I have a show of hands of everybody here who's Jewish or Muslim and who has faced Islamophobia or anti-Semitism in your own personal life? Yeah. I mean, it's pretty ubiquitous. One of my gym teachers called me Super Jew in middle school, and look at me, it was not a compliment.
Thank you, everyone. I wanted to, because some of the people did not hear properly the video that was played, and because Fatima understandably didn't want to summarize it, I will explain, I'll mention that what happened was a group of Israeli extremist counter-demonstrators shouted at the Jewish and Muslim demonstrators various slurs and insults, including that they're terrorists, that they're going to kill their brothers, that they're going to take over Gaza, and at one point, strangely, used a slur commonly used against male homosexuals, I'm not sure, and various other insults, including at one point yelling at someone Muslim, which I presume he was a Muslim, so it was only the tone of his voice. Imagine someone saying Jew to someone who's Jewish, but with a tone of voice that says, take that as an insult. So I hope that explains to the people who couldn't hear it.
Please.
Thank you. I wanted to ask for an explanation of Zionism and how anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic, and I ask that because my understanding, following the Middle East for 40 years, and I understand that Israel-Palestine is one of the most polarizing issues in politics and in America. And so on the topic of anti-Zionism, my perspective is that it's typically used as a way of separating Judaism from the idea of Zionism in the context of the way Palestinians were treated in Israel from early days. Does that make sense?
So I hear that that's your perspective. I disagree with it. And I'll tell you why I disagree with it. So I'm a Zionist, and for me, being a Zionist means that I have I believe in a Jewish right to self-determination in the land of Israel. And as I said before publicly, and I've said publicly for the last, as long as I've been giving this presentation, I do not believe that my right to self-determination as a Jewish person precludes the right to self-determination of a Palestinian, of a Muslim, Christian, Arab. We're not the only ones who can be in that land. And what Zionism means to me is more than a political entity. Zionism is something that is key, that is a core piece of my theology. It is a core piece of my liturgy, of how I pray, what I say, what I believe, and what I hold up as Zion in the way I live my life as a Jew. It is bigger than a country. So when someone uses the word, when someone says, oh, you're a Zio or Zionist and uses it in a pejorative way, that starts to be anti-Semitic because that's denying me full realization of what it means for me to live my Judaism. So that's a line. Like I said before, you can criticize the government, you can criticize the state. There are some heavy political issues there, very, very heavy. But when the rhetoric and when the words start to call for the complete destruction of a Jewish state, that's where we've hit anti-Semitism, because you are denying a piece of Jewish faith. And you are denying Jews who believe that this is a core piece of their faith. And I realize that that's difficult, and if you've met one Jewish person, that means you've met one Jewish person, because, surprise, Jews are not a monolith. There are a variety of beliefs. But I also know that this one is pretty strongly held.
Let me see if I can help bridge, okay? I think a lot of us know people who don't believe there should be a Jewish state. They are non-Zionists. I won't use the word anti-Zionist. I'll just say non-Zionists, not rhetorical. And I would say that's not anti-Semitic, even though I have the same view about self-determination that the rabbi does. However, what you commonly find is that Zionist becomes a slur. So that somebody, that 90% of us, or 85, whatever it is, are Zionists. So if we are all immoral because we're Zionists, that's when it becomes anti-Semitic. That's a subtle distinction, but it's a profound one. If someone says, well, do you think 85 or 90% of Jews are incapable of having decent morality, they're just evil people, then you'd say, oh no, God, that's anti-Semitic. They say, well, did you know that 85 or 90% of Jews are Zionists? See, that's the logic. That's the Spinozistic logic that I bring to you today. All right.
Dan said it way better than I would have, but yes, I agree.
Okay, go ahead.
If there's just time for a brief follow-up to explain, like where I understand it is, it's not, and I realize there's a range of views, so undoubtedly some people who use Zionism as a slur don't believe in the right of Israel to exist. That's not what I understand that I'm asking. There is, for instance, a book called Separating, I think it's Reclaiming Judaism from Zionism, as an example of this spectrum that I'm talking about, from Jews talking about distancing themselves.
Sir, I want to ask, are you Jewish?
I'm not.
Okay.
And
So
so I may be asking this
So
in
yeah,
some
so
ignorance.
what I want to say, because I see where you're pushing and I see the things that you're asking, I would not push at key tenets of your faith. Right now, you are pushing at key tenets of my faith in a way that's uncomfortable.
Okay.
All right, well, great questions, honestly, great questions. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I realize you guys talk about this all the time, so thank you for coming and doing it again. My question, I want to first start just by saying something obvious, that Jews, Christians, and Muslims were all people of the book, and the book writ large tells the story. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, Isaac and Ishmael, Joseph, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and so on to the present day. My question to you is about story, about the way each of you tell yourself this story, specifically when it comes to the modern nation-state of Israel. So when you tell your story, does Israel fit in your narrative or does it not fit? And to give you just a little idea of what I'm asking here, this is not a multiple choice question, but just to give you some points. I remember reading Abraham Joshua Heschel's book, Echo of Eternity, many years ago, and you read the book and you can see that he thinks that Israel is the glorious fulfillment of a prophetic promise. I've talked to many Christian pastors, and for many of them, not all of them, but Israel is a narratively meaningless cul-de-sac for the people who remain blind to the universal truth of Jesus and the Gospels. I've spoken to Muslims who feel as though, and again, not all, but some feel that Israel is a political, geographic, and theological stick in the eye to Muslims who see Zionism as evidence that history is moving in the wrong direction. So my question to you again is, where does Israel fit narratively into the story you tell yourselves and the people that you preach to about what that modern nation-state of Israel is in the story?
Are you asking the rabbi?
I'm asking anyone who's willing to answer the question.
I think I said it previously. It's a key part of who I am. B'nai Israel, the people of Israel, those who struggle with God. And I'm part of that, and I'm getting there. And that means that I'm also tied to I'm tied to the state of Israel, to the land of Israel. And yes, it is a completely normal thing for me as a Jew to struggle and to learn and to constantly grow with what that means. But it is a huge part of my narrative. Can't wait to go back. If you handed me plane tickets tomorrow, I'd be there, much to my kids' chagrin.
So to the allies here and to the Muslims here, Rabia Chaudhry was a member of JIDS for a long time. You may know the names, the podcast. And she went to the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and she came back and gave a talk at the Muslim Community Center, and she was like this one moment that I'll never forget. She said what she was taught is that Jews don't think so much about the afterlife. They haven't over time been as focused on it as Christians or Muslims. What we have been focused on is someday there'll be an Israel. someday we'll be back in that land. And that was an important moment for her. So I just throw that out. That might help. But we got a few more people. No, hold on, sir. Look at the line.
I might put damp on the good spirit, guys. I enjoyed the beginning of the presentations. They were all in love and understanding. We are all made like God, or God was made like us. Everything was very good until the horrible moment when the Israeli flags were on that little screen. And that event in November in Montgomery County was a spillover of the Gaza war. It was not an anti-Semitic event of Jews against Arabs. Wow. It was a spillover from Gaza. And I know that the Gaza war is a big elephant in this room. And we can have an act about that another panel. How do we deal with that?
I'm sorry, I interrupted you because I didn't understand. Spillover, okay, thank you. I couldn't understand what you were saying.
It's okay.
Oh, I'm not clear?
No, go ahead.
No, I couldn't understand. Please go ahead.
We heard you.
We heard you.
What I'm trying to say, to show me the Israeli flags, people wrapped in Israeli flags, hitting or shouting or cursing, in the middle of a discussion about trying to live together, Muslim and Jews, was totally inappropriate. I don't say that there is no war in Gaza. There is a war in Gaza. And if Hamas would surrender, there would not be a war in Gaza. And I think that's what we have to say.
Thank you very much. Let's keep it rolling. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Go ahead.
Sure. Good afternoon. First of all, I want to say my name is Sabrina Dent, and I work with the BJC, the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. And I want to thank all of you for your presentations today and each of the things that you shared, both professionally and personally. I'm looking at you because I really appreciate the practical information that you shared with this group, because a lot of times people do not know the rights that they have. One of the observations that I made in this conversation is that the word nationalism came up, but white Christian nationalism did not come up in this conversation. I think it is critically important to name what is happening right now in society, because it impacts many communities that are racial and religious and ethnic minorities in this country. So I do have a question that leads to the fact that, and I want to point to what the rabbi said. You raised the question about what is happening in support of public schools, right, and the children in public schools. We know that in Texas, there was the introduction of the chaplains bill that happened. And that bill was specific to allowing a certain type of chaplains to come into public schools and basically have the opportunity to proselytize to children that come from many different religious identities and none. How many people know that this is also happening in the state of Maryland? There has been a bill that has been introduced. So my question is, what has JAMAAT done or is doing to really rally around that particular issue that has impact on the community and children in public schools? Because this also connects to the book bans that are happening in public schools across the country. Thank you.
I'll just address that really briefly. Thank you, Sabrina, for that very important question. I know that this is something that JAMAAT would take up. We have a number of issues on our plate, as you might imagine. We're very busy these days. But that is, we will make sure to put that on our list of priorities to address. I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Please.
That bill is currently sitting in committee. Let's hope it stays there and dies there, because I looked it up. And Sabrina, can you give a quick shout out for the film that BJC is putting forward?
Are you referring to God and Country?
God and Country, which calls out white Christian nationalism.
Yes, it is a documentary that is coming out very soon, if it's not already in. It's already out, so I recommend that everyone watches it because it talks about the history of Christian nationalism, how it's had impact historically, and what is happening now. People need to know this narrative and see how it has greater impact on our communities as a whole. Thank you, Rabbi.
Good afternoon. Thank you once again for such a beautiful panel. I came here with the goal in mind to be educated myself. I'm a Christian pastor from a southern church in Arkansas, moved to Maryland 2 years ago.
Could you speak into the microphone, please?
Yes.
Tilt it up, tilt it up.
Once again, thank you, panelists, for today. My goal today was to be educated. My name is James Hollywood III, and I came here from a southern background, Southern Baptist background, Christianity, from Arkansas and Missouri. I just had a few comments to make as it relates to our young people and our future of our young people. Hatred starts by the lack of education. A lot of young people, especially in my color of time, are not educated at home. So how are they educated? We have a lot of different forces that are against our younger generations with social media, with influences from the popular culture of Hollywood, not this Hollywood. But there's a lot of things that are influencing our kids that are negative, but how do we combat those? We need to have more dialogue and more conversations like this because the future of our generations are our young people and we need to get that figured out. So you must have to ask yourself the question, how have you become self-educated on such a topic? How have you become so passionate about such a topic? And that will help us to better understand how we can be able to help reach our young people so that we can be able to carry this forward so that we won't continue down this path of hatred. And that we can be able to foster within our communities some more love and more unity and more peace, more equity, and more equality.
So before we answer that, it's now 5 o'clock. Pledged to be out of here at 5:30. I see this line continue. Hold on, Walter. You all want to continue in this forum? Because if you do, I want more people on this line because I want to hear more voices.
I think we have to because it'd be too hard to break up.
Okay, so I'm Walter Ruby. I'm the president of JAMAAT, and I'm just very proud of Fatima and what she put out there. And I just want to be clear, Kate did that also, but that both the Muslims and the Jews, including myself, in JAMAAT strongly supported the idea of taking up this issue of the November 5th rally. And, the reason is because the credo, the central credo of JAMAAT is standing up for each other. If either community is attacked, that we need to be there for the other. The complicated thing here is that there's kind of been this image that, well, it's all, outsiders who are doing this, it's all maybe Christian nationalists, and we're like good together, good to go. But this did happen, and we feel as uncomfortable as it is, and it happened here, and we need to address it, and we need to not just let it get covered up, as Mr. Elrich has done a very good job in doing, unfortunately, so that most of you have never heard of it. So that's one thing, and then the other thing I just want to say very quickly, in terms of what Abby is saying, why doesn't, JAMAAT take up anti-bigotry against Jews as strongly as it does bigotry against Muslims? And certainly we would be very happy if, you provide us with information and all that. But the point I wanted to make is that it's true that there is a whole Jewish power structure, including the JCRC, which you work with, the ADL, the AJ committee, and all of them that are doing exactly that. And also giving the impression that anti-Semitism is the only problem out there. So that's when this came up, we said, we've got to talk about this. We can't just we don't, and it's going to make people uncomfortable, it's going to make Jews uncomfortable and others, but we really need to. And also because, Abby, the last point is this definition of anti-Semitism that was promoted a couple of years ago by your organization, pushed through I think by the Montgomery County Council, called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, included an example which was not even about anti-Zionism. I'll agree with you, that's problematic, but this definition said, if someone criticizes Israel more than he or she does other democracies, well, that could be a really good indication he or she is anti-Semitic. And that, to me, is extremely problematic, because it says to all the non-Jews here, who are here today, hey, you guys, you better be careful. You know, or we could put you down, you know, you could be called an anti-Semite, which is not good for one's career, I'm sure. It's scary, you know, and there's an atmosphere almost of McCarthyism that's coming out of this. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Debbie Spielberg, and I am a special assistant to the county executive, Mark Eldridge. So I wanted to make it clear that I'm here. He asked that I come. He's not here. He's on an economic development trip.
You need a flak jacket? I think we have one over here.
So I just wanted to say the response to the first we heard about the incident was the December 13th letter, and we did not answer, and that was a mistake, and I'm sorry about that. And I would also say on the Islamophobia panel, not his best night. He was tested positive for COVID a day later, so and it had been a long day. And I think he likes in person better, but he's done better. It was not a great night, I think mostly because he heard what they said, but he didn't acknowledge it. But I will tell you, before that, since then, and many other times, he's met with a variety of members of the Muslim community on the book issue, on many other issues. He has many people in the Muslim community and in the Jewish community he meets with. He often will challenge people on issues regardless of who he's talking to and whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable. So just wanted you to know he wanted to be here. He asked that I be here, and I'd be happy to talk to anyone afterwards.
Thank you.
I just want to address that really.
Hold on. Mike, you can go around. Let's get more voices. We're not doing small groups. Come on, Bill, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Alan.
Alan, I'm sorry.
There's a couple of points. One.
Microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I remember when I was, I guess, 7th grade, 6th grade, I was walking behind two kids in the San Fernando Valley where I grew up, and they were talking about this girl, and one kid said to the other, "Too bad she's Jewish." These were like 12-year-old kids. So I would think families are a major source of anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-black, or whatever. And what are we doing about that? I know there's this huge political effort to restrict the books that are in schools and discussions that are in schools about LGBT or whatever. So that's a big factor. The other point is, I wrote you about this, that in the Super Bowl, 123 million people who viewed it, it cost $7 million for a 30-second commercial. That's about $250,000 a second. And that's how important it is to get eyeballs or clicks in our digital world. And what that does is it fosters a monolith concept that all Arabs are the same or all Jews are the same. And we need to address that.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Friedman, and I'm on the board of a new organization called Association of Jewish Psychologists.
Microphone.
Yes, Sarah Friedman, on the board of a new association called Association of Jewish Psychologists. We were formed very recently as a consequence of realizing that there is anti-Semitism.
Sarah, please, up to the microphone. Thank you.
Realizing that anti-Semitism is growing, especially in academia, also in scientific organizations. Realizing that the psychologists can help, and the Jewish students really feel harassed and feel that psychologists who are not Jewish cannot help them. Also, I'm a developmental psychologist, and there is hardly any research about in the intersection of child development and anti-Semitism. How do people become anti-Semitic? they're not born anti-Semitic for sure. And we don't have the evidence. We want to grow to the evidence. And how do Jewish children respond to the anti-Semitism? We have some that they're afraid. I have 2 grandchildren. They don't talk about it. They live in North Carolina. They don't talk about it. But I assume that they also feel what's happening in the world around them. So we need to know that. Now,
Can I just say, when I was subjected to that and I complained to the principal, she did nothing. Yeah, she did nothing.
And then
In Bethesda. North Bethesda Junior High School, 1973 or 4. 0.
And another thing that I wanted to say, that we are all believing in the importance of communication, of talk. But think about what happens in academia. In academia, you have people who are Jewish and non-Jewish working together for years. And suddenly, the Jewish professors feel threatened, not only by their students, but also by their colleagues. And they're looking to move to other jobs, and they feel that the administration is not supporting them. So here there is a place of contact of people, Jewish and non-Jewish. They were friends, they were friends and colleagues. And at the time of the rise of anti-Semitism, there is no help. So I think we need to remember that it's not, that talking is important. Another point that I want to make is that whatever educational programs that are in existence to teach children about anti-Semitism, like going to a museum and so on, and they're not evaluated for their efficacy. We don't know what works, what doesn't work. Did you take a medication that wasn't tested for its efficacy? No, but we don't know about those programs. So those are all points that I wanted to bring to your attention.
Thank you so much for that perspective.
I'm Peter Kovac. I have a somewhat delicate question. I have to say, when you gave your initial presentation, I was waiting for religion as one of the variables. I definitely, and I come from a mixed family. I mean, my parents are Holocaust survivors, but we have Catholics and Muslims. We're very interfaith. One of the prejudices that I grew up around was that Judaism is a tribal covenant. It's not open. If you're a Muslim, you want to be a Muslim, you go to a mosque, you convert. If you want to be a Christian, you go to a church, you convert. There was always that element there, and I wondered how, because I think that is a prejudice, and I'm wondering how you'd address it. Thank you.
I don't. I won't use my loud mommy voice for this. Or rather, you can convert to Judaism, sure. I mean, I love making Jews that I don't have to raise. It's wonderful. Helping goats on, it's fabulous. I think that the piece, though, that you're raising up of this idea of tribalism is where that anti-Semitic piece of Jews only have a loyalty to each other, and that very insular inside how Jews control the world, et cetera, that's where it all kind of gets to. But no, we don't proselytize, but in fact, we'll turn you away a couple times, but sure, come on in.
You want a piece of this, right?
I'm very curious. I know there was a question earlier. I'm curious to hear from Todd about how he got into this. So there's a question like, why do you do this? How did you get into this? And I also want to give, you're, I'm assuming, probably not Muslim. So.
Thanks for the question. It's actually the most common question we get asked. I don't look like someone who would care about Islamophobia or anti-Semitism, right? But there's an academic response, and there's my scholarly career. That's the pathway there, and I will not talk about it because it's boring. My personal life, I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, in the 70s and the 80s, and the dominant religion, if you will, in terms of certain political power in southern Alabama, you don't need me to lecture that to you right now, was white evangelical Christians. And I was not one. I grew up in the Presbyterian church, but wasn't quite in that particular in-group. And the language I encountered growing up in schools from people in my other friend groups, evangelizing to me, proselytizing to me, speaking a language that just never resonated with me, asking questions that I wasn't asking about God. And I felt like an outsider. And what I ended up doing by the time I was in high school is I tried not to talk about religion at all. And my own struggles. I was basically, I think, a closet agnostic. But in southern Alabama in the 1970s, you do not come out of the agnostic closet. So, my religious journey is more complicated since then. But I do had that feeling of being an outsider. And when I became an adult, I gravitated very quickly towards people in the United States who found themselves as religious outsiders, who couldn't quite fit in, who maybe sometimes struggled to have to translate themselves or defend themselves to the majority population in order to sort of get that spot, right? In order not to trigger any sort of anxieties or worse. And so that's a lot of why I got into it. And to make things more complicated, one of my first careers was as a Presbyterian minister. I was a Presbyterian minister, and I was a Presbyterian minister at 9/11, and I realized two things. I did not know as much about Islam as I wish I would have, in part because seminary does not prepare you for that, or it didn't in the 90s. Your education was about Christianity, even though you're going into a world that's multi-religious. So there was that, and even more importantly, and I have a much stronger position on this, I didn't know a Muslim at the time, in that particular context at least. I, to this day, tell people who want to, like, what's something about Islam I really need to know to push back against Islamophobia. I usually respond with, the most important thing you need to know is someone who is Muslim, or some people who are Muslim. That relationship is a game changer. And then learn about Islam from the way that they live it, and experience it, and talk about it. And so that's how I got to this place. And there's more to the story.
Thank you.
My name is Maren, and my question is really for Todd. One of the things that caught my attention was that you wrote a book that we should not ask Islam to call out against terrorism. I think that there will be peace in the Middle East when the other Arabs and the other Muslims love their fellow Muslims more than they hate the Jews. And I think that by not asking them to call out against terrorism is doing a great disservice to coming to some sort of conclusion. I think that both parties do need a place in the land of Israel. There's no question. I mean, it's a holy place for all the three major Abrahamic religions. Why would you think that Islam should not call out against terrorism?
Well, great question, and I would encourage you to read the book, because you're drawing a conclusion that's not the conclusion of the book. First of all, Islam is not a person, Muslims are. So I'm not going to call Islam to do anything. Muslims are over, 1.8, 1.9 billion people, very diverse. And my biggest concern is that when it comes to violence, and particularly in the post-9/11 era, Muslims are treated as a collective and guilt by association applies. So if someone named Osama bin Laden does something bad, all Muslims need to start calling him out, under the assumption that they're guilty of somehow harboring some sort of sympathy for him or for Al-Qaeda until they prove otherwise. And that is not an expectation ever put upon me, ever.
It's put upon Jews.
I'm given the benefit of the doubt. Exactly, which is why I don't think you should call upon Jews to condemn the actions of Israel government right now.
How about the actions of those people?
That is a guilt by association. Anytime there's a guilt by association mindset, and that's what anti-Semitism and Islamophobia share in common. You do not use that. White Christian Americans do not have to face those kinds of questions. That's what I meant by that story I mentioned about Dylan Roof. No one to this day has ever asked me to condemn what happened in Charleston. No one. If that perpetrator had been Muslim, all Muslims would be asked to call them. If that perpetrator had been Jewish, all Jews would have been called upon to answer for that. And that's what I'm pushing back against now. and why we shouldn't ask Muslims to condemn terrorism. Not because I think we shouldn't condemn violence. All people should condemn violence, unjust violence, all sorts of, right? But Muslims, Jews, others are treated differently than people who look like me, have my racial, religious, and cultural background, and it's that double standard that is toxic that I push back against.
So your mother probably taught you don't judge a book by its cover. We just proved you don't judge a book by its cover.
The title's tricky.
Go ahead, please.
My name is Judith Shamir. I identify myself as an American and an Israeli Jew, and I work very hard on dialogue. I am a member of the board of another dialogue group called Interfaith Communities for Dialogue, which is in Fairfax County in Virginia. I come to these things because I think it's so important for us to really be able to hear one another. And it's a shame to me that we didn't get a chance to actually have the kind of small group discussions, because that's where the real action is when you actually
We won't throw
speak.
away these questions.
And I know this is what you love to do, and so I'm just expressing my sorrow that we didn't get to that, because when we talk face to face, that's when we can share more of our emotions. And the area of discomfort that I had in this program, and there were a lot of wonderful things that were shared, but the discomfort is to my mind too much of a focus on what some extreme views have been and how they've been expressed, and whether or not there's been reaction to it. There's a lot of emotion, certainly when you're talking about anything related to Israel and Palestine. People get very emotional. I get very emotional. I was in Israel on October 7th. I lost family. I'm very emotional about that issue. It's important to me to talk to people who are not Jewish, and to be able to have a conversation, not specifically about what happened to me or who was right or who was wrong, but to be able to listen, and that's the most important part of it, is to listen to what other people are saying, what their understanding is, what maybe they don't understand, what questions they have. And so I think we need much more of these meetings, but more particularly of the more one-on-one or small discussions, so that we can really hear one another.
So this is JID's 7th, post-October 7th meeting, and we hope to keep going, and we appreciate your comments. For what it's worth, when that gym teacher called me Super Jew, that making fun of me as an athlete, that was not a fringe opinion. That was mainstream.
Yeah.
That was a joke, folks. You can laugh. All right.
They used to call me flat-footed Fred.
Tough crowd.
Yeah, it is tough crowd. I'm Asa Pratt, and I'm a cantor at Bethesda Synagogue around the corner on Old Georgetown Road. I have a couple reflections. One, all the panelists did a wonderful job. Abby, I'm like amazed by your. Yeah, I'm amazed by your equanimity and just the beautiful way that you presented. Like, I'm really proud of what you did up here, because it's very hard. It's very, very difficult as a Jew right now. I want to say that what Tom said, I'm really glad that you said what you said about not asking people to apologize for the actions of others. Jews are being attacked in this country and all over the world because of what the Israeli government chose to do in response to 9/11 in their country, which is insane. Like, it's just insane. Like, Jews don't make decisions for what the Israeli government does. In fact, most Jews in Israel don't make decisions for what the Israeli government does. So it's completely crazy for us to be attacked based on that. So I'm really happy that you made that distinction. I will also say, as a Jew, if another Jew walked into a synagogue, a mosque, anywhere, and did something in my name, I would refute it immediately. For me, I would not want anyone thinking that a Jew did that, and that represents Judaism. That's all I can say for myself. Now, I would like the people who aren't Jews here, who attend, if you attend anti-Israel rallies or pro-Palestinian rallies, I would like you to encourage people to see the Israeli government as a government, and to stop seeing it as a Jewish organization. Stop seeing it as it's Jews doing it. Jews are not doing anything. Jews are mourning hostages. That's what Jews are doing right now. That's what we're doing. And we're giving money to Israel so that they can help people who are displaced, 200,000 people at least. The other thing is, forgetting my train of thought. The other thing is that it's very difficult to be in academic, you said academic circles, it's very hard to be in schools right now. I just want to tell you a brief story. A child in my child's school, it didn't happen in my child's classroom, but it happened in a friend's child's classroom. They were building some things and knocking them down as part of an engineering project, and another child said, "Oh, you should knock down the tower, because that's what you Jews like to do, is knock things down." The child was not suspended, the child was not talked to, the child was not disciplined. This is going on every single day in TPS, and it's horrifying. Like, it's horrifying that my Jewish child goes to a school in which there's no protection for Jews, there's no protection for Muslims, there's all this infighting. And so, like, I really want to encourage all the people in this room, especially those of you who aren't Jewish, to understand that there is an enormous amount of anti-Semitism in the world. That was my core point. There's an enormous amount of anti-Semitism in the world because we assume things about Jews that are simply not true. And assume things about what we support and what we don't support that are simply not true, just like Muslims. Oh, I just forgot the last one. Anyway, I guess I'll remember it later. But please, somebody said that it's not anti-Semitic, that the head of JAMAAT said it's not anti-Semitic to focus more on Israel's democracy than other democracies, to criticize Israel more than other democracies. That is true, but it's a dangerous lie. If you care about the Palestinians, but you don't care about the Uyghur Muslims, then you're not for human rights. If you care about the Palestinians, but you don't care what happens to people in Syria, you're not for human rights. If you care about the Palestinians, but you don't care what happens to people in Afghanistan, you're not for human rights. You're just against Jews. So I'm here to tell you, human rights are human rights. It's not, you can't pick and choose. We don't get to be selectively outraged by one war and not by another. Every war is outrageous. Every war is horrific. Every war kills thousands of innocent people. That's all I have to say.
We're running up against our deadline, and it is Ramadan, so real short.
Yeah, so Eid Mubarak to everybody who's celebrating Ramadan. I'm Jeff Rubin. I'm one of a number of folks here from Howard County, right over the border. We have a really rich panel here full of resources, so I'd like to ask you, we've dealt a couple of times with the issue of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on the campuses, both at the academic university level and at the local K through 12 level. What recommendations do you have for combating those two scourges on our campuses and in our communities? Is it going the legal route? Is it going the quiet route? And I guess at the same time, the question is, to what extent can we preclude the discussion of difficult foreign policy issues at the K through 12 level when it becomes divisive?
That's a great question. You guys have a 20-second answer?
I mean, that's why. If I had a 20-second answer, three of my colleagues wouldn't need to have a job right now, because that's what they do. I strongly encourage you to reach out to any of the organizations in this community that are doing this full time, because it is in fact a full-time job figuring out how to deal with this in schools and campuses.
I can also say, if you want to talk later, I work for Interfaith America. This is what we do on college campuses, which we promote pluralism, building relationships and collaborating across deep difference. A lot of our college communities, this is not just students, it's staff and faculty, administrators, they do not know how to have difficult dialogue. Not taught these skills. We're not taught these skills in K through 12, frankly, I was. And it's showing at a very tense time right now. So building relationships, teaching people how to have difficult dialogues, collaborating across deep difference, that's what we need to do. That is not a solution that's going to happen by next week, though. That's years in the making. We've got to build a pluralistic infrastructure in higher education, which does not exist right now.
This is a very quick comment. I'm also from Howard County in Lower South Valley.
And I've heard people again and again say that kids learn about anti-Semitism from their parents. And we had a report to our anti-Semitism line about kids drawing something in chalk with a Star of David and a Muslim crescent and somebody carrying a cross coming and destroying this. And we found out it was from a computer game by Roblox, which I had never heard of. And I think the game is called The Doors, and it's an adventure game. The main character is a guy who carries what they call a crucifix, but it's not a crucifix. And they want to destroy the Star of David and the Muslim crescent. So I just think we need to be careful to realize how complicated it is where students are learning these things.
Thank you. Penultimate comment, please.
This is Imtiaz Ahmed, and I'm from Pakistan. Thank you very much to all the panelists for the insightful presentation indeed. And I need to give compliment to the organizers over here because back in Pakistan and South Asia, we don't have such an inclusive environment among the people of faith to go to the religious places. It is a great learning for me to reproduce over there among the universities. So I was doing my postdoctoral research on developing resilient youth for the inclusive higher education campuses back in Pakistan, and then scaling up to the South Asia through the transformative theology. But in the middle of the project, my professor and the College of Education came to realize that when the students came to the universities for undergrad, we have to go extra miles to make them unlearn and the stuff they have been exposed to through the textbooks and things like that. So now we are planning to make a course, make a piece embedded into the pre-service and in-service teacher education training. Especially, we need to sow the seed of peace early on by teaching early childhood teachers and caregivers, teaching how to teach peace, and also involving the families through parenting. So the transmission of culture and their own religion is very essential. But center their stories and quality home time among the peace and humanity and common elements of humanity. So if it is a nationwide movement, then it would have a trickle-down effect on all the societies and the generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave, you're going to close this down. Can you keep it brief?
This isn't the way I would want to close it down. I very seldom disagree with panelists, and I've been to many. This has been a wonderful program, but political action as a Jew has been because the Holocaust sits on my shoulder. And that's one of the things that drove me to do was join the support committee and protest when the Serbs were killing Muslims. Many different things. I could give you examples. There's this person who was an American rabbi, and I don't ever refer to him as a rabbi. In fact, talk to me after if you want to know his name, but I really don't even want to spread his name. But many years ago, he was trying to spread the belief that all Arabs should be basically kicked out of the whole land of Israel, the whole area. And friends in New Jewish Agenda and others, we protested him when he spoke at synagogues. And one time he was speaking at a synagogue, just a couple examples. Once he spoke and he sneered at an Israeli soldier, and it ended up a minute later with a Jew and a Jew on the floor, with one Jew choking another Jew. And the person who came to the rescue was Albert Mokhiber of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination. What's the last letter? C, I know it's C. The last time we debated protesting him, we decided not to when he was speaking to an Orthodox synagogue because we thought we would be giving him more attention, so we declined. But I went to the synagogue and did it anyway. My bottom line is that I feel, I'm addressing this to you, sir, and I feel it's my moral duty to really raise hell when a Jew behaves like that. There was a whole series of laws against his beliefs in I mean, he's infamous and he was disgusting. And I just felt it was my own duty and my friend's duty to protest from within and be as public about it as possible. And I let go of some of my expectations of other groups, but I still kind of hope that they will do that too.
You and I do not disagree. You and I are not disagreeing. I don't disagree with that point. If you feel morally obligated to call it violence, you should call it violence or bad behavior, whether it's a fellow Jew, whether it's anyone else. What I'm against is me saying because you are Jewish, if you don't call that out, something's wrong with you too. And in fact, let's get the government apparatus on you. Let's start profiling you, let's start surveying you, let's start discriminating against you because you too must be guilty because I haven't heard you talk. That's my main.
So I'll make an analogy. He's talking about duties and rights. I think it's my duty not to eat meat. I think it's your right to eat meat. Eat meat. Eat animal flesh. It's my duty not to, but it's your right to. So they're not incompatible. Go ahead.
I'll close with just one suggestion. You all made fantastic points. And we all know, we've been alluding to the point that children hear things and bring them out at school and attack others. And so you all made really amazing points, but we also know what's happening in the Capitol. We heard about the lasers, we heard about many other things where people are running out of the elevator when some others enter. So would you all be able, please, I know you deal with the politicians, which is another great, but maybe their humanity will make you listen to them. So please push there too. It's good to start at schools and everywhere, but we have to take it all across. Thank you very much.
So I want to thank all of you who are still here. I want to thank the hosts for making this happen. I want to thank the panelists for making this extremely insightful and lively. And to all the Muslims here, an easy fast for the next hour or so.